What would you sacrifice to save someone you love? Sarah Mitchell thought she knew exactly who she was, until a letter arrived that shattered every truth she'd ever been told. A dead woman she'd never met has left her a fortune, a Charleston mansion, and a photograph that reveals an impossible secret. Sarah's entire life has been built on a lie. The father who raised her wasn't her father. The name she carries isn't her own. And 32 years ago, someone loved her enough to commit an unforgivable crime to set her free. Now Sarah must journey to a world of old money and older secrets, where a powerful family has waited decades for her return. What she discovers will force her to question everything: the meaning of family, the price of freedom, and whether some lies are actually acts of love. In a house where every room holds a hidden truth, Sarah will uncover a story of desperate courage, impossible choices, and a mother's love so fierce it changed the course of 2 lives forever. This is a story that will make you question what you would do for the people you love, and whether the truth is always worth the pain it brings. Follow our channel to never miss a story that touches the deepest parts of the human heart. Like this video and comment below where you're watching from. Let's build a community of people who believe in the transformative power of truth and love. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, unremarkable except for the weight of it. Heavy cream paper, the kind that whispered of old money and older secrets. Sarah Mitchell stood in her cramped Brooklyn kitchen, coffee growing cold in her hand, staring at the return address. Whitmore and Associates, Estate Attorneys, Charleston, South Carolina. She didn't know anyone in Charleston. Hadn't been south of Virginia in her entire 32 years. The letter opener trembled slightly as she slid it beneath the sealed flap. Inside, a single sheet of letterhead and something else. A photograph, black and white, edges soft with age. Sarah pulled out the letter first, her eyes scanning the formal language with growing confusion. Dear Ms. Mitchell, it is our duty to inform you that you have been named as a beneficiary in the estate of Mrs. Eleanor Catherine Whitmore, deceased October 15, 2023. As per Mrs. Whitmore's explicit instructions, you are required to appear in person at our offices to receive information regarding your inheritance. Mrs. Whitmore was quite insistent that this matter be handled with the utmost discretion and that certain documents be delivered to you directly, without intermediary. Sarah's vision blurred. The name meant nothing to her. Eleanor Catherine Whitmore. She rolled it around in her mind, searching for any spark of recognition. Nothing. The letter continued with details about appointment times, required identification, and the urgency of the matter. But Sarah's attention had already shifted to the photograph. The woman in the picture stood on a grand front porch, white columns rising behind her like sentries. She wore a dark dress with a high collar, her hair swept up in the fashion of the 1960s or early 70s. But it was her face that made Sarah's breath catch. The sharp line of her jaw, the wide-set eyes, the slight asymmetry of her smile. Sarah had seen that face every morning in her bathroom mirror for 3 decades. The resemblance was uncanny, impossible. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, her boyfriend of 2 years. Still on for dinner tonight? My mom wants to finally meet you. Sarah barely registered the words. She set the phone down, picked up the photograph again, held it next to the small mirror hanging by her kitchen window. The similarities were undeniable. This woman, this Eleanor Whitmore, could have been her grandmother, or her mother, but that was impossible. Sarah's mother had died when she was 3. A car accident, her father had always said, his face closing down whenever young Sarah asked for details. And her grandmother? Long gone before you were born, was all he'd ever offered. Her father, John Mitchell, a man of few words and fewer explanations, who'd raised her alone in their small apartment, working double shifts at the automotive plant to keep them afloat. He'd been dead 5 years now, a heart attack at 58, taking whatever secrets he'd harbored straight to his grave. Sarah's hands shook as she pulled out her laptop, typing Eleanor Whitmore Charleston into the search bar. The results populated slowly, each one adding another layer to the mystery. Eleanor Catherine Whitmore, prominent Charleston socialite, philanthropist, member of one of the city's oldest families. Married to Judge Harrison Whitmore III for 47 years until his death in 2015. No children listed, estate valued at over $12 million. No children. Sarah clicked through to the obituary, her eyes racing over the formal prose. Eleanor was known for her charitable works, particularly her dedication to organizations supporting adoption and foster care reform. She is survived by several cousins and was preceded in death by her husband and her parents, Catherine and William Ashford. Adoption. The word hung in the air like a physical presence. Sarah stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the worn linoleum. She paced the narrow kitchen, her mind spinning through possibilities, each more outlandish than the last. Her father had never mentioned adoption. Her birth certificate. She'd seen it dozens of times, applying for her driver's license. Her passport listed John Mitchell and Susan Mitchell as her parents. There'd never been any indication, any hint, that she was anything other than exactly who she'd been told she was. But the photograph, that face, those eyes. She picked up her phone, scrolling through her contacts until she found the name she needed. Patricia Hernandez, her father's former co-worker, one of the few people who'd known him well, who'd attended his funeral and held Sarah while she sobbed over the casket. Patricia? To Sarah. Sarah Mitchell. I'm sorry to bother you, but I need to ask you something about my dad. The older woman's voice came through warm and concerned. Sarah, honey, of course. What's going on? You sound upset. Did my father... Did he ever mention anything about South Carolina? Or Charleston? Or a woman named Eleanor Whitmore? The pause on the other end stretched too long. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. Patricia. Sarah. Baby, what brought this up? Why are you asking about this now? So you do know something. Sarah's voice rose, sharp with sudden anger and fear. What is it? What didn't he tell me? Another pause, then a heavy sigh. Your father made me promise, Sarah. He made me swear I'd never say anything unless something like this happened. He said someone might come looking someday, and if they did, if anyone from his past came calling, I was supposed to tell you to be very careful. Eleanor Whitmore had been everywhere in Charleston society. Charity galas, museum openings, historic preservation committees. The photographs showed her aging gracefully through the decades, always impeccably dressed, always with that same slight asymmetric smile that Sarah saw in her own mirror. In every photo, Judge Harrison Whitmore stood beside her. Tall, distinguished, his hand possessively on her elbow or the small of her back. But there was something in Eleanor's eyes, Sarah thought. A distance, a sadness that the smile couldn't quite mask, especially in the later photographs. After the judge died in 2015, the pictures showed a different Eleanor. Still elegant, still gracious, but something had shifted. She looked lighter somehow, as if a great weight had been lifted. Sarah found an interview from 2018 in Charleston Magazine, one of Eleanor's rare public statements. The journalist had asked about her philanthropic focus on adoption reform and foster care advocacy. Every child deserves to know the truth about where they came from, Eleanor had said. Secrets destroy families. They poison everything they touch. I've spent too many years watching good people be destroyed by lies told with the best intentions. If I can help even one child find their way back to the truth, if I can help one family heal from the wounds of deception, then perhaps some good can come from all the pain. The words felt aimed directly at Sarah, a message sent across time, waiting for her to be ready to hear it. On Thursday morning, Sarah booked a flight to Charleston. She moved through the motions mechanically, packing a small suitcase, arranging a week off work with a doctor's note she'd forged, leaving a note for her neighbor to water her plants. Marcus had stopped texting after she'd canceled dinner for the third night in a row. She knew she should call him, explain something, but what could she possibly say? The flight left LaGuardia at 6 a.m. on Friday. Sarah sat in a window seat, watching New York disappear beneath clouds, and felt like she was shedding a skin, leaving behind Sarah Mitchell. Marketing associate, Brooklyn resident, daughter of John Mitchell, and becoming someone else, someone unnamed, unknown. Charleston Whitmore and Associates occupied a converted antebellum mansion on Meeting Street, all white columns and black shutters, magnolia trees dripping Spanish moss in the front yard. Sarah stood on the sidewalk outside, her carry-on bag at her feet, and tried to steady her breathing. The September heat pressed down like a physical weight, thick and wet in a way New York heat never was. She felt conspicuous in her black pants and simple blouse, too northern, too plain among the pastel dresses and seersucker suits she'd seen on her Uber ride from the airport. The receptionist, a woman in her 60s with perfect silver hair and a smile that didn't reach her eyes, looked up as Sarah entered. For just a moment, less than a heartbeat, something flickered across her face. Recognition? Shock? But then the professional mask slid back into place. "May I help you?" "Sarah Mitchell. I have an appointment with Mr. Whitmore at 10 o'clock. The woman's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on her pen. "Of course, Ms. Mitchell. We've been expecting you. Please have a seat. Can I get you some sweet tea while you wait?" Sarah declined, too nervous to drink anything. She perched on the edge of an antique settee, surrounded by oil paintings of stern-faced men in Confederate gray and women in hoop skirts. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked away the minutes with agonizing slowness. At precisely 10 o'clock, a door opened and a man emerged. Late 60s, impeccably tailored suit, eyes the color of creek water. He studied Sarah with an intensity that made her want to shrink back into the cushions. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, his voice carrying the slow molasses drawl of old Charleston money. "I'm Robert Whitmore. Eleanor was my mother. Please come into my office. We have a great deal to discuss, and I suspect very little of it will be easy to hear." Sarah followed him down a hallway lined with more portraits, more stern faces judging her from their gilded frames. His office was all dark wood and leather, law books lining floor-to-ceiling shelves. He gestured to a chair across from his massive desk, then closed the door with a quiet click that sounded like a cell locking. He didn't sit. Instead, he moved to the window, looking out at the street where tourists wandered past with cameras and shopping bags, oblivious to the drama unfolding behind these historic walls. "My mother made me promise to tell you everything," he said finally, his back still to Sarah. "She said you deserved the truth, that she'd kept silent too long out of fear and misplaced loyalty. She said the lies had poisoned our family for 32 years, and that she wouldn't let them poison one more day." He turned then, and Sarah saw tears tracking down his face, cutting through the veneer of Southern gentility. "She made me promise, but God help me, I don't know how to tell you. I don't know how to say the words that will destroy everything you've ever believed about yourself." Sarah's voice came out steady, stronger than she felt. "Then start at the beginning. Start with who I really am." Robert Whitmore sank into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 68 years. He opened a drawer, pulled out a thick manila folder, and placed it on the desk between them like a bomb waiting to detonate. "Your real name," he said quietly, "is Catherine Harrison Whitmore, and 32 years ago, on a warm June night very much like this one, you disappeared from your nursery. The police searched for months. My father used every connection he had, called in every favor. But you were gone, vanished like smoke, and we all believed you were dead." He pushed the folder toward her with trembling fingers. "Until 6 months ago, when my mother hired a private investigator and found you living in Brooklyn under a stolen name, raised by the man who took you. The man who my mother had been protecting all these years. The man who, despite everything, she said saved your life." Sarah's hands moved without conscious thought, reaching for the folder, opening it to reveal photographs of a baby. Chubby-cheeked, dark-haired, wrapped in a pink blanket embroidered with the letter C. Her face, her infant face. "Welcome home, Catherine," Robert whispered. "Welcome to the family that never stopped looking for you." The folder felt impossibly heavy in Sarah's hands, or Catherine's hands, she supposed, though the name felt like a costume that didn't fit. Inside were dozens of photographs. A nursery painted pale yellow with white furniture, teddy bears lined up on shelves, a mobile of silver stars hanging above an empty crib. Crime scene photographs, she realized with a jolt. Evidence of her own disappearance. "I need you to understand the context," Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. "I need you to understand what Charleston was like in 1991, what our family was like, what my father was like. He stood again, unable to remain still, and moved to a sidebar where crystal decanters caught the light streaming through the plantation shutters. He poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon despite the early hour, didn't offer Sarah any. Judge Harrison Whitmore III was the most powerful man in Charleston. 4th-generation lawyer, appointed to the federal bench at 42, connected to every family that mattered. When he spoke, people listened. When he made decisions, they stood. He was untouchable, Sarah. Catherine, completely and utterly untouchable. Robert took a long drink, his hand shaking slightly. He was also a monster. The word hung in the air between them, stark and ugly in the genteel surroundings. My mother tried to leave him 3 times before you were born. Once when I was 7, once when my sister Margaret was 10, and once right after she found out she was pregnant with you. Each time he found her. Each time he brought her back. Not with violence, my father was far too sophisticated for that. He used the law, used his connections, threatened to have her declared mentally unfit, to take us away, to ensure she never saw her children again. In 1980s Charleston, a federal judge's word was gospel. She didn't stand a chance. Sarah's throat felt tight. She tried to reconcile this image with the elegant woman in the photographs, the one who looked so much like her. What did he do to her? Control, Robert said simply. Complete and absolute control. Where she went, who she spoke to, what she wore, what she ate. He monitored her phone calls, read her mail, accompanied her to every social function and stood watching, making sure she played her role perfectly. The perfect judge's wife. The perfect Charleston lady. She was a prisoner in a mansion, surrounded by servants who reported her every move back to him. He returned to his desk, sank heavily into the chair. When you were born, something shifted in her. She told me later that holding you, looking at your face, she realized she couldn't let you grow up in that house. Couldn't let you be shaped by his cruelty, couldn't let you learn to accept that kind of control as normal. But she also knew she couldn't leave. He'd made that clear. If she tried to run with you, he'd use every resource at his disposal to find her and take you away. And then you'd be alone with him, with no one to protect you. Sarah's hands trembled as she flipped through more photographs. News clippings, judge's infant daughter missing, massive search underway for Whitmore baby. Federal judge offers $100,000 reward for information. Your father, John Mitchell, worked at the house, Robert continued. He was our groundskeeper's assistant. A quiet man, good with his hands, didn't talk much. He'd been there about 8 months when you were born. My mother said later that she'd watched him, noticed how he was always kind to the other staff, how he'd help the housekeepers carry heavy loads without being asked, how he'd leave flowers from the garden at the kitchen door for the cook. Small kindnesses that my father never showed. Robert's voice grew quieter, more strained. The night you disappeared, there was a charity gala at the house. 300 people, the cream of Charleston society, all there to honor my father for some legal achievement or another. My mother was required to attend, to stand beside him and smile and play hostess. She'd hired extra security for you, had a nurse stationed outside your nursery door all night. But at some point during the evening, the nurse left her post. Later she claimed she'd heard a noise downstairs and went to investigate. 20 minutes, that's all. 20 minutes. And when she came back, you were gone. Sarah found a photograph of herself, baby Catherine. Maybe 3 months old, wearing a white christening gown, held in Eleanor's arms. The joy on Eleanor's face was so pure, so complete, that Sarah felt tears burning behind her eyes. The police investigation was massive, Robert said. FBI got involved because of my father's position. They questioned everyone who'd been at the gala, every member of the staff, every delivery person who'd come to the house in the previous month. John Mitchell was questioned 3 times. He passed 2 polygraph tests, seemed genuinely devastated by your disappearance. Quit his job a week later, said he couldn't bear to be in the house anymore. No one suspected him. Why would they? He was just a groundskeeper. No connection to the family, no apparent motive. But he had a motive, Sarah whispered. My mother asked him to do it. Robert's eyes widened. How did you? Because that's the only way it makes sense. The only way he'd risk everything, change his entire life, live in hiding for 3 decades. She asked him to save me, didn't she? Robert was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. My mother never admitted it out loud. Not to me, not to the police, not even when my father was dying and she could have finally told the truth without consequences. But 6 months ago, when she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, when she knew she was dying, she hired that private investigator. And when he found you, when he brought her photographs of you living in Brooklyn, working at a marketing firm, safe and free and so far from my father's reach, she cried. She cried for 3 days straight. He pulled out another photograph, this one recent. Sarah walking down a Brooklyn street, coffee in hand, laughing at something on her phone. The invasion of privacy should have angered her. But instead she felt only a strange tenderness. Eleanor had been watching over her, even from a distance, even in death. She left you everything, Sarah. The house on Battery Street, the investment portfolio, the trust funds. Everything that was hers to give. Robert Jr., my son, and I get nothing from her personal estate. She said we didn't need it, that we had our own money from our father. But more than that, she said you deserved it. You deserved compensation for being ripped from your life, even if that life would have destroyed you. You deserved to know the truth, even if the truth was painful. Sarah's mind reeled, unable to process the enormity of what she was hearing. $12 million. A Charleston mansion. A family she'd never known existed. And underneath it all, the knowledge that her entire life, John Mitchell's entire life, had been built on an act of desperate theft committed out of love. My father died 8 years ago, Robert said. Heart attack on the golf course. Quick and painless, which was more than he deserved. At his funeral, I watched my mother stand beside his casket with tears streaming down her face, and everyone thought she was grieving. But I knew better. I knew she was crying because she'd spent 32 years protecting his reputation, keeping his secrets, maintaining the lie that you'd been kidnapped by a stranger. She'd sacrificed her own daughter to protect the family name, to keep the truth from destroying everything the Whitmore legacy stood for. He pushed a leather-bound journal across the desk. She wrote this in the last months of her life. It's for you. Her story in her own words. Everything she never got to tell you. Everything she wanted you to understand. Sarah's fingers brushed the soft leather, felt the weight of all those unspoken words, all those years of silence and sacrifice. Why now? She asked. Why wait until she was dying? If she knew where I was, why didn't she reach out sooner? Robert's smile was sad, understanding. Because John Mitchell was still alive, and she'd promised him, all those years ago when she begged him to take you and run, that she'd never expose him, never come looking, never risk bringing you back into the world she'd worked so hard to save you from. She kept that promise for 27 years, until he died. And even then, she waited. Waited and watched and made sure you were truly safe, truly free, before she allowed herself to reach out from beyond the grave. Sarah sat alone in her hotel room that night, the leather journal unopened on the desk before her. She'd checked into a historic inn on Church Street, a place with creaking floors and antique furniture that smelled of lemon polish and old roses. Through the window, she could hear tourists laughing on the street below, horse-drawn carriages clopping past, a street musician playing something melancholy on a saxophone. Charleston at night was beautiful in a way that made her chest ache. Soft light spilling from gas lamps, shadows dancing across centuries-old brick, the distant sound of church bells marking the hours. This was supposed to be her home. This city, with its refined manners and buried secrets, should have shaped her childhood, should have been as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. Instead, it felt like a foreign country. She'd spent the afternoon walking aimlessly through the historic district, past rainbow row houses and hidden gardens, trying to feel some connection to this place, trying to feel like Catherine Harrison Whitmore. But the name still felt borrowed, a role she was auditioning for but hadn't yet earned. Now, at nearly midnight, she finally found the courage to open the journal. The handwriting on the first page was elegant but shaky, the letters wobbling slightly as if written by someone whose hands no longer quite obeyed. Sarah traced her fingers over the words, this physical evidence of Eleanor's final months, and felt tears gathering. "My dearest Catherine," the entry began, "I have rehearsed these words 1,000 times in my mind, tried 100 different ways to explain the inexplicable, to justify the unjustifiable. But in the end, all I can do is tell you the truth as plainly as I know how, and hope that somewhere in your heart, you might find space to forgive me." Sarah pulled the desk chair closer, switched on the reading lamp, and surrendered herself to her mother's voice. "When I discovered I was pregnant with you, Catherine, I knew immediately that I couldn't let you grow up in that house. I couldn't watch Harrison do to you what he'd done to Robert and Margaret, shape you into either a victim or a tyrant, destroy your capacity for genuine love and connection. I would rather die than see that happen. But I also knew I couldn't leave with you. Harrison had made that clear after my previous attempts. He had lawyers, judges, police officers, politicians, all in his pocket. If I ran, he'd find me. And then he'd take you from me legally, permanently, and I'd never see you again. You'd be raised entirely under his control, with no one to shield you from his cruelty." The next entry was dated June 15, 1991, the night of Sarah's disappearance. "I asked John to take you. I begged him, actually, there in the garden on a Tuesday afternoon while you napped upstairs. I told him everything, the years of abuse, Harrison's connections, my previous failed escape attempts. I told him that I knew it was an impossible thing to ask, that I had no right to ask it, but that I was desperate and you were innocent and deserved a chance at a real life." He didn't answer right away. He walked to the far end of the garden and stood there for nearly 10 minutes, his back to me, while I waited in agony. When he finally turned around, there were tears on his face. He said, "I'll need 3 days to prepare, 3 days to get documents ready, to arrange a safe route out of Charleston. Can you wait 3 more days?" I've never felt such relief and such sorrow simultaneously. Relief that you would be saved. Sorrow that I would never see you grow up, never hold you again, never know if you were happy or safe or even alive. Eleanor described the plan in painful detail, how John had researched everything meticulously, how he'd obtained false documents through contacts from his military days, how he'd planned his route to avoid major highways and busy cities, how Eleanor had arranged the gala specifically to provide maximum chaos and confusion, how she'd instructed the nurse to leave her post at a specific time, how she'd wrapped baby Catherine in a specific blanket that John would recognize in the darkness. The hardest part was not running to your nursery after he'd taken you, not checking to make sure you were really gone, that he'd really followed through. I had to stay downstairs, had to smile and chat and play hostess while my heart was being ripped from my chest. When the nurse finally raised the alarm, when the screaming started and the police came, I had to act like a devastated mother, which I was, just not in the way everyone assumed. I lied to the FBI. I lied to the investigators. I lied to Harrison and Robert and Margaret and everyone who tried to help find you. I protected John's identity, steered suspicion away from him, even helped establish his alibi. And when he quit a week later and disappeared, I made sure no one looked too closely at where he'd gone. Harrison never knew. He died believing you'd been kidnapped by a stranger, that somewhere out there, his daughter might still be alive. I let him believe it, let him suffer with not knowing. It was the only revenge I ever got. The final entry was dated just 2 weeks before Eleanor's death. "The investigator found you, my darling girl. You're alive. You're safe. You're beautiful and strong and free. John kept his promise. He raised you well, loved you well, protected you from all the darkness that would have consumed you here. I'm dying, Catherine, and I find I'm not afraid. I'm grateful. Grateful I lived long enough to know you survived, that the sacrifice was worth it, that you got to have a real life. I only wish I could have known you, wish I could have heard your voice, held your hand, told you face to face how much I loved you, how much I've always loved you. Forgive me if you can. Forgive John, who was braver than anyone I've ever known. And forgive yourself for whatever anger or confusion or grief this truth brings you. You deserved better than the choices we made. But we made them out of love, desperate and imperfect and ultimately devastating, but love nonetheless. Be happy, my Catherine. Be free. That's all I ever wanted for you. Sarah closed the journal as dawn began to lighten the sky outside her window. Her face was wet with tears, her throat raw from silent sobbing. Robert picked Sarah up at 10 o'clock the next morning, his silver Mercedes gliding to a stop in front of the inn with barely a whisper of sound. He looked as exhausted as Sarah felt, dark circles under his eyes, his usually crisp suit slightly rumpled. They'd both spent the night wrestling with ghosts, it seemed. "Are you ready to see the house?" he asked as she slid into the passenger seat. His voice was gentle, careful, as if speaking to someone who might shatter at any moment. Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. She'd read Eleanor's journal 3 times through, memorizing passages, trying to absorb the magnitude of what her mother, both her mothers in different ways, had done for her. The grief was overwhelming, but underneath it ran a current of something else. Gratitude, perhaps, or wonder at the strange and terrible forms that love could take. They drove through Charleston's morning streets in silence, past joggers and dog walkers, past historic churches with their white steeples piercing the blue sky. The city was waking up, opening itself to another day of tourists and heat and the slow, patient weight of history. Sarah watched it all through the car window, this place that should have been hers, and felt like a ghost haunting her own life. Battery Street ran along the waterfront, lined with massive homes that spoke of old money and older privilege. Robert slowed the car in front of a 3-story Georgian mansion, pale yellow with white columns, black shutters, and a wide veranda that wrapped around the front and side. Massive live oaks draped in Spanish moss shaded the perfectly manicured lawn. It was beautiful in the way that made Sarah's chest tighten. Too perfect, too formal, too much like a museum of someone else's life. "This is it," Robert said unnecessarily. "Your home, or it was supposed to be." He produced a key from his pocket, old brass worn smooth from decades of use. Sarah took it with trembling fingers, felt its weight, its history. How many times had Eleanor held this key? How many times had she locked herself into this beautiful prison? The front door opened onto a foyer that took Sarah's breath away. Soaring ceilings, crystal chandelier, a grand staircase curving upward with an intricately carved banister. Everything was preserved exactly as it had been, Robert explained. He and his sister Margaret had maintained the house after their mother's death, kept the staff on, made sure nothing was changed or sold until Sarah could see it. "She left instructions," Robert said, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. "Very specific instructions about what should be kept and what should be given away. She said you'd need to see everything exactly as it was, to understand the full story." They moved through rooms that felt frozen in time. A formal parlor with furniture so pristine it looked like no one had ever sat on it. A dining room with a table that could seat 20. A library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and the lingering scent of old leather and tobacco. Everything was beautiful and suffocating. Each room a testament to wealth and taste, and the emptiness at the heart of it all. "My father's study," Robert said, opening a door off the main hallway. The room was all dark wood and masculine authority. Massive desk, leather chairs, walls covered with diplomas and awards and photographs of Harrison Whitmore shaking hands with presidents and governors and Supreme Court justices. Mother wanted this preserved too. She said you needed to see what kind of man he was, the power he wielded, the way he used that power to control everything and everyone around him. Sarah studied a photograph of Harrison in his judge's robes, stern and distinguished, radiating the kind of authority that made people instinctively defer. She tried to imagine calling this man father, tried to picture growing up under his watchful gaze, and felt sick. "I hated him," Robert said quietly, staring at the same photograph. "I know you're not supposed to say that about your dead father, but I hated him with everything in me. He destroyed my mother piece by piece. He made Margaret so afraid of men that she never married, never let anyone close. He turned me into a coward who stood by and watched and did nothing while he dismantled the people I loved." His voice cracked, and Sarah saw tears streaming down his face. This polished Southern gentleman finally letting his careful facade crumble. "When Mother told me the truth about you, about what she'd done, I was so angry at first. Angry that she'd sacrificed you to save you. Angry that she'd lied to us all for 32 years. angry that she'd let father die without ever exposing him for what he really was. But then I read her journals. Not just the one she left for you, but others, dozens of them hidden in her bedroom. And I understood. She did the only thing she could do. She saved the one person she still had the power to save. They climbed the grand staircase to the second floor, past more portraits of severe-looking Whitmores, past windows that looked out over the harbor where sailboats bobbed in the morning light. Robert stopped in front of a door at the end of the hallway, his hand resting on the knob but not turning it. "This was your nursery," he said. "Mother kept it exactly as it was the night you disappeared. Even after father died, even when she could have finally changed things, she left it untouched. She said it was a reminder of what she'd lost and what she'd saved." He opened the door, and Sarah stepped into a room that felt like stepping back in time. The pale yellow walls, the white furniture, the mobile of silver stars. Everything from the crime scene photographs, but softer now, gentler in the morning light. A rocking chair sat by the window, a baby blanket draped over its arm. Children's books lined a small shelf. A teddy bear sat in the corner, its fur worn from being held. Sarah walked to the crib, ran her fingers along the smooth wood of the railing. Somewhere in her earliest memories, buried so deep she'd never been able to access them, she had slept here, had been loved here, had been torn from this room on a summer night by a man brave enough or desperate enough to steal a judge's daughter. On the dresser, she found a photograph in a silver frame. Eleanor holding baby Catherine, both of them laughing at something outside the camera's view. The joy on Eleanor's face was so pure, so unguarded, that Sarah felt something crack open inside her chest. This was what had been stolen from both of them. Not just time or years, but the simple, uncomplicated love between mother and daughter. "She used to come in here," Robert said from the doorway. "After father died, I'd find her sometimes, sitting in that rocking chair, holding that teddy bear, crying. She'd talk to you as if you were still here, tell you about her day, about what was happening in Charleston, about how much she missed you. She never stopped being your mother, even when you were gone." Sarah picked up the teddy bear, held it close, breathed in the faint scent of lavender and old fabric. And suddenly she was crying, deep, wrenching sobs that felt like they were being pulled from somewhere ancient and wounded inside her. She cried for Eleanor and for John, for the impossible choice they'd made and the decades of silence that followed. She cried for the childhood she'd lost and the one she'd gained, for the father who'd raised her with such fierce love and the mother who'd loved her enough to let her go. Robert crossed the room and wrapped his arms around her, this half-brother she'd never known, and they stood there together in the nursery, two people shaped by the same man's cruelty, finally able to grieve together all the years that had been stolen from them. "You don't have to keep any of this," Robert said when they'd both composed themselves. "The house, the furniture, any of it. You can sell it all, start fresh, take the money and build whatever life you want. But Mother hoped you'd at least spend some time here first. She hoped you'd give Charleston a chance to be your home, the way it should have been from the beginning." Sarah looked around the nursery, at this shrine to a life that never was, and felt something shift inside her. Not resolution exactly, but the first stirring of possibility. Maybe she didn't have to choose between Sarah Mitchell and Catherine Whitmore. Maybe she could be both. Maybe she could honor both the man who'd raised her and the woman who'd given birth to her by finding a way to integrate their gifts into something new. "I'd like to stay," she said quietly. "At least for a while. I'd like to try to understand this place, this family. I'd like to try to understand her." Robert smiled through his tears. She would have liked that. She would have liked that very much. Sarah moved into the Battery Street house 3 days later, bringing only her single suitcase from New York. The rest of her life, her apartment, her job, Marcus, felt impossibly distant, like memories from someone else's existence. She'd sent Marcus a long email trying to explain what had happened, but the words had felt inadequate, unable to capture the enormity of discovering her entire identity was built on loving deception. He'd responded with concern and confusion, asking when she'd be back, whether she needed him to come to Charleston. She hadn't answered yet, didn't know how to answer, The house staff had remained after Eleanor's death. Maria, the housekeeper who'd worked there for 30 years. Thomas, the elderly gardener, and Caroline, a young woman who managed the household accounts and correspondence. They greeted Sarah with a mixture of curiosity and something that looked like relief, as if they'd been waiting for her return to make the house feel whole again. "Miss Eleanor spoke of you often in those final months," Maria said, her Spanish accent soft and warm. "She showed me the photographs the investigator brought. Said you had her mother's eyes, your grandmother Catherine's eyes. Said the name had been passed down for generations, waiting for you." Sarah spent her first days exploring the house room by room, opening drawers and closets, trying to piece together Eleanor's life from the artifacts left behind. She found love letters from Harrison in the early days of their marriage. Passionate, possessive, already hinting at the control that would define their relationship. She found Eleanor's wedding dress preserved in tissue paper, a confection of silk and lace that must have cost a fortune. She found photographs spanning decades, watching Eleanor's smile grow more brittle with each passing year, the light gradually fading from her eyes. In Eleanor's bedroom, now Sarah's bedroom, though it felt presumptuous to claim it, she discovered a locked drawer in the antique secretary desk. The key was in Eleanor's jewelry box, tied with a ribbon and a note. "For Catherine, when she's ready." Inside were more journals, but also letters. Dozens of letters, carefully preserved in chronological order, each in a different envelope, each postmarked from a different city. Sarah's hands shook as she opened the first one, dated August 1991, postmarked from somewhere in Ohio. The handwriting was John's, her father's, though younger, less steady than she remembered from birthday cards and shopping lists. "She's safe," the letter began. No greeting, no preamble. "Healthy and happy and already smiling at everything. I've named her Sarah, after my grandmother who raised me when my parents couldn't. Sarah Mitchell. We're in a small town where nobody asks questions. I found work at an automotive plant. It's good work, steady. Enough to keep us comfortable. I think about you every day. Wonder if you're all right, if he suspects anything, if you're being punished for what we did. I hope not. I hope he believes the lie, believes she was taken by a stranger. I hope you can find some peace in knowing she's free. I won't write again unless there's an emergency. It's too dangerous. But I wanted you to know this one time that I kept my promise. She's safe." Sarah read through letter after letter, years of updates sent sporadically, carefully, always from different locations as John moved them around the country before finally settling in New York. He wrote about her first words, her first steps, her first day of school. He wrote about scraped knees and childhood illnesses and the fierce love he felt for this child who wasn't his by blood but was his in every way that mattered. And tucked between the letters were Eleanor's responses. Never mailed, never sent, but written nonetheless. A one-sided conversation with a man she'd trusted with her most precious treasure, pouring out her grief and gratitude onto pages that would never reach him. "Thank you," Eleanor had written again and again. "Thank you for loving her. Thank you for keeping her safe. Thank you for being the father I could never give her." Margaret laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Peace? In this family? There's never been any peace, Catherine, or Sarah, or whoever you decide to be. There's only the weight of expectations and the price of disappointing them." She set the hairbrush down carefully, turned to face Sarah fully. "Mother left you everything that was hers to give. The house, the investments, the trust funds. Do you know what she left me? A letter. One letter explaining why she did what she did, asking me to forgive her, begging me to welcome you home. As if a letter could make up for a lifetime of lies." Sarah could see the hurt beneath the anger. The little girl who'd lost her sister and then discovered that loss had been orchestrated, intentional. "I don't want to take anything from you, Margaret. The money, the house, I never asked for any of it. If you want." "I don't want your charity," Margaret snapped. "And I don't want Father's money, which is what Robert and I have plenty of. What I want is impossible. I want my mother back. I want the truth to have been told 32 years ago. I want to have grown up knowing my sister. I want a lot of things I can't have." She moved toward the door, then paused, her hand on the frame. But since we can't have what we want, we make do with what we have, which is apparently you, a stranger with our mother's face, come to claim a heritage she knows nothing about. Then teach me, Sarah said impulsively. Help me understand. You're right that I know nothing about being a Whitmore, about Charleston, about any of this, but I want to learn. I want to know about Eleanor, about who she was before Harrison broke her. I want to know about you and Robert, about what it was really like growing up here. Help me understand what I missed. Margaret studied her for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. Why? Why do you care about any of this? You have a whole life in New York, a career, probably a boyfriend or friends or some kind of existence that has nothing to do with us. Why not just sell the house, take the money, and go back to being Sarah Mitchell? Because I can't, Sarah said simply. Because now that I know the truth, I can't unknow it. Because Eleanor loved me enough to give me up, and John loved me enough to risk everything, and I owe it to both of them to at least try to bridge these two halves of myself. Margaret's eyes glistened with unshed tears. She would have liked you, I think, the you that you've become. She always said her greatest fear was that saving you would mean losing you entirely, that you'd grow up never knowing how much you were loved. Margaret returned the next day with a cardboard box full of photographs and a tentative olive branch in the form of her mother's favorite tea blend. They sat on the veranda as the afternoon sun filtered through the live oaks, casting dancing shadows across the weathered floorboards. The tea was Earl Grey with bergamot, strong and slightly bitter, exactly the way Eleanor had always taken it. This was her sanctuary, Margaret said, gesturing toward the garden that stretched beyond the veranda. The only place Father couldn't completely control. He chose the architect for the house, selected every piece of furniture, approved every paint color. But the garden was hers. He didn't care about flowers and trees, thought they were frivolous, beneath his notice. So she poured everything she couldn't say, everything she couldn't be, into this soil. Sarah studied the garden with new eyes. It was magnificent. Winding paths through beds of camellias and azaleas, climbing roses covering a wrought iron arbor, a small reflecting pool surrounded by ferns and hostas. But there was also something wild about it, something that resisted the formality of the house. Native plants mixed with cultivated varieties, flowers blooming in unexpected combinations, spaces left deliberately overgrown. She designed it as a kind of map, Margaret continued, opening the box and pulling out a worn garden journal. Each section represented something she wanted to remember, something she refused to let Father erase. See that magnolia tree there, the one with the white bench beneath it? She planted that the day Robert was born. The camellia garden beyond it, that was for me. And there, in the far corner, do you see that section with the yellow roses? Sarah nodded, her throat tightening. She planted those 3 days after you were born. Yellow roses for joy, she said, for the pure, uncomplicated happiness you brought her, even though she already knew it couldn't last. Margaret's voice wavered. After you disappeared, Father wanted to tear that section out, said it was morbid to maintain a memorial for a dead child. But Mother refused. It was the only time I ever saw her stand up to him directly. She said if he touched her garden, she'd burn the house down. Margaret flipped through the journal, stopping at a page dated June 1991. Eleanor's handwriting covered it, interspersed with pressed flowers and small sketches. She wrote in here almost every day, documented every bloom, every change, every season. But really, she was documenting her life, the parts of it that still felt like hers. Look here, this entry from the week before you disappeared. Sarah leaned closer, reading her mother's careful script. The yellow roses are thriving, climbing higher every day as if reaching for freedom. I envy them their mindless growth, their simple purpose. Tomorrow I will ask John if he's ready. Tomorrow I will set in motion the thing that will save my daughter and destroy my heart. But tonight, I'll sit in the garden and watch Catherine sleep through the nursery window and memorize the sound of her breathing, the curve of her cheek, the perfect trust in her eyes when she looks at me. Tomorrow she'll be gone. Tonight she's still mine. Tears blurred Sarah's vision. The grief in those words, the terrible certainty of impending loss, felt like a weight on her chest. How did she survive it? How did she live with that hole in her life for 32 years? The garden, Margaret said simply. She lived in the garden. Every morning at dawn, before Father woke, she'd come out here. Rain, shine, summer heat, winter cold, didn't matter. She'd walk the paths, tend the flowers, talk to the plants as if they could hear her. Thomas told me once that he'd heard her having whole conversations with you out here, telling you about her day, asking your advice on which flowers to plant, apologizing over and over for what she'd done. Margaret pulled more photographs from the box. Candid shots of Eleanor in the garden, dirt on her hands and knees, a genuine smile on her face. In these pictures, she looked younger, lighter, more herself than in any of the formal portraits hanging in the house. After Father died, she spent even more time out here. It was like she could finally breathe. She redesigned sections, added native plants, created habitats for butterflies and birds. She said she was making it wild again, letting it become what it was always meant to be before anyone tried to control it. Sarah studied a photograph of Eleanor kneeling beside a flower bed, her hands cupped around something. A butterfly, maybe, or a small bird. The tenderness in her posture, the reverence, spoke to a woman who understood what it meant to be caged and had dedicated her life to creating spaces where other living things could be free. "There's something else I need to show you," Margaret said, standing abruptly. "Something I only discovered after Mother died, when I was helping inventory her things. Come with me." She led Sarah down the veranda steps and into the garden, following a winding path past the roses and camellias, deeper into the more overgrown sections. They stopped at a small clearing hidden behind a screen of bamboo, where an old stone bench sat facing a simple granite marker partially covered by flowering vines. Sarah's breath caught. The marker bore no name, just a date, June 18, 1991. "This is where she came to mourn you," Margaret said softly. "We all thought you were dead, of course. Father organized a memorial service 6 months after you disappeared, when it became clear the investigation wasn't going to find you. But Mother refused to have you buried in the family plot, said she couldn't bear to put an empty casket in the ground. So she created this instead. Her private memorial, her place to grieve." Sarah knelt before the marker, ran her fingers over the date carved into stone. June 18, 1991, 3 days after her disappearance, the day Eleanor must have finally accepted that her daughter was really gone, that the plan had worked and there was no going back. "I used to spy on her sometimes," Margaret admitted, sitting on the bench. "I'd follow her out here early in the morning and watch from behind the trees. She'd sit right where I'm sitting now and talk to you for hours. She'd tell you about what was happening in Charleston, about Robert's law school graduation and my work at the museum. She'd tell you about the flowers blooming and the birds nesting and the way the light hit the water at sunset. She'd tell you she was sorry, over and over. Sorry for giving you up. Sorry for not being brave enough to leave with you. Sorry for choosing your freedom over her own happiness." Margaret wiped tears from her cheeks. "And sometimes, especially after Father died, she'd tell you about John, about how grateful she was to him, how she prayed every night that he was taking good care of you, that you were happy and healthy and loved. She said she'd made her peace with never seeing you again as long as she knew you were all right." Sarah discovered she was crying too, silent tears tracking down her face as she absorbed the weight of Eleanor's grief, the decades of longing distilled into this small, hidden space. "She could have found me sooner. After Harrison died, she could have reached out, could have tried to build a relationship. Why did she wait so long?" "Because John was still alive," Margaret said, "and she'd promised him she'd never expose him, never risk bringing you back into the world she'd saved you from. Even after Father's death freed her, she honored that promise. She watched you from a distance, made sure you were safe, but she never interfered. Not until she knew she was dying and wouldn't be here to see what happened next. That's when she finally hired the investigator, finally allowed herself to reach out." Margaret stood, moved to where Sarah knelt, and placed a hand on her shoulder. "She loved you so much, Catherine. More than I understood until I read her journals. More than I thought it was possible to love someone you'd barely known. She loved you enough to let you go, to live with that grief every single day, to die without ever hearing you call her mother. That's a love I can't even comprehend." Sarah looked up at her sister, saw her own grief reflected back. "I don't know how to honor that. I don't know how to be worthy of that kind of sacrifice." "You're already honoring it," Margaret said, helping her stand. "By being here, by trying to understand, by not running away from the truth even though it would be easier. Mother didn't save you so you could have an easy life, Catherine. She saved you so you could have a real one. A life where you could make your own choices, become your own person, free from father's control and the weight of this family's expectations." They stood together in the hidden clearing, two sisters separated by decades but united by grief. As the afternoon light faded and the garden filled with the sound of crickets and evening birds, Sarah thought about Eleanor sitting on this bench morning after morning, pouring her love into the void, trusting that somewhere her daughter was safe and happy and free. "I want to do something for her," Sarah said finally. "Something to show that her sacrifice mattered, that I understand what she gave up. Will you help me?" Margaret squeezed her hand. What did you have in mind? The adoption reform work she cared about, the foster care advocacy. She spent her life trying to help other children find the truth about where they came from. I want to continue that. Use her money, her connections, the Whitmore name to actually make a difference. Create something that lasts, something that honors both the mother who gave me up and the father who raised me. For the first time since they'd met, Margaret smiled. A real smile that transformed her face, made her look younger, less burdened. She would have loved that. She would have been so proud. 6 months after arriving in Charleston, Sarah stood in the grand ballroom of the Battery Street house, watching as workers hung the final banner, the Eleanor Whitmore Foundation for Family Truth and Reconciliation. The room had been transformed from the formal, intimidating space where Harrison had once held court to something warmer, more welcoming. Gone were the heavy drapes and dark furniture, replaced by light colors, comfortable seating arrangements, and photographs of families. Adopted children reunited with birth parents, foster kids who'd found their way home, people whose lives had been changed by knowing the truth about where they came from. Margaret stood beside her, reviewing the guest list for tonight's launch event one final time. 300 confirmed attendees, including the governor, 2 senators, and every major philanthropist in the Carolinas. Mother would have been terrified of this much attention. Mother would have been proud, Robert corrected, joining them with a box of programs fresh from the printer. He'd become Sarah's closest ally in the foundation work, using his legal expertise to navigate the complex world of adoption law reform and family reunification. She spent her whole life hiding the truth. This is about making truth something to celebrate instead of fear. Sarah took one of the programs, studied the mission statement they'd crafted together over months of late-night discussions and tearful debates. Every person deserves to know their story. Every family deserves a chance at healing. Every secret kept out of fear rather than love creates wounds that span generations. The Eleanor Whitmore Foundation exists to bridge the gaps created by well-intentioned lies and give families the tools they need to find their way back to each other. The words still made her throat tight. They'd tried dozens of versions, argued over every phrase, but this was the one that felt right. This was Eleanor's legacy, transformed from private grief into public good. Maria appeared in the doorway, her face flushed with excitement. "Miss Catherine, there's someone here to see you. She says she knew your mother, says it's important." Sarah exchanged glances with her siblings. That still felt strange to say, siblings, family, people who shared her blood and her history. "Can it wait until after the event? We're about to start final preparations." She says she was Eleanor's nurse, the one who was supposed to be watching your nursery the night you disappeared. The room went completely still. Sarah felt her heartbeat in her throat, in her fingertips, everywhere at once. The nurse, the woman whose 20-minute absence had made everything possible. "Send her to the library," Sarah said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'll be right there." The woman waiting in the library was in her late 60s, small and bird-like, with nervous hands that twisted the strap of her purse. She stood when Sarah entered, her eyes filling with tears. "Miss Catherine," she whispered. "Lord, you look just like her." just like Eleanor when she was young, before everything. "You're Linda Morrison," Sarah said, recognizing the name from the police reports she'd read and reread. "You were my nurse." "I was," Linda said, sinking back into her chair as if her legs wouldn't hold her. "And I've carried the weight of that night for 32 years, wondering if I'd done the right thing, if I'd destroyed or saved something precious." Sarah sat across from her, her hands folded in her lap to keep them from shaking. "Tell me what happened. Tell me the truth." Linda took a shaky breath. "Your mother came to me 3 weeks before that night, asked me if I believed in God, if I believed some sins were worth committing if they saved an innocent soul. I didn't understand what she meant then, but I told her yes. I'd grown up in foster care myself, bounced from home to home, never knowing where I really came from. I knew what it meant to be lost." She pulled a worn envelope from her purse, pressed it into Sarah's hands. "She gave me this, said to only open it if something happened to her, if she died before she could tell the truth herself. When I heard she'd passed, when I saw the announcement about this foundation, I knew it was time." Sarah opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a letter in Eleanor's handwriting, dated 3 weeks before the kidnapping. "Dear Linda, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone and my daughter has come home. I need you to know that what I asked you to do that night was not a mistake or a moment of weakness. It was the most deliberate, most carefully considered decision of my life. When I asked you to leave your post, to give John those 20 minutes to take Catherine and run, I was asking you to help me commit an unforgivable act for the most important reason I've ever known: love. You have your own history with abandonment and loss, and I'm asking you to be part of creating a different story for my daughter. A story where she gets to be free, to be herself, to choose her own path without the weight of this family's expectations crushing her spirit. If you're reading this, it means my gamble paid off. It means Catherine survived, thrived, became the person she was meant to be instead of the person Harrison would have forced her to become. I need you to tell her something for me, something I could never say while I was alive without exposing John, without risking everything we built to keep her safe. Tell her that every moment of grief, every year of missing her, every morning I woke up wondering if she was all right, all of it was worth it. Every second of pain was a price I'd pay 1,000 times over to know she was free. Tell her I loved her enough to let her go. Tell her that's the truest form of love I ever learned. And tell her that wherever she is, whatever name she's using, whatever life she's built, that life is my greatest achievement. Not the charities I supported or the causes I championed, but her freedom. That's my legacy." Sarah's tears fell onto the paper, blurring Eleanor's careful handwriting. Linda reached across and took her hand, squeezed it gently. "She was the bravest woman I ever knew," Linda said. "And the saddest. She carried that grief like stones in her pockets, weighed down by it every day but never once expressing regret. She told me once, about 5 years after you disappeared, that she'd trade all her remaining years just to see you one more time, just to know you were happy. But then she said, 'But I won't, because my happiness doesn't matter. Her freedom does.'" Sarah wiped her eyes, tried to compose herself. "Why did you help her? You could have lost your nursing license, could have been charged as an accomplice. Why take that risk?" "Because I understood," Linda said simply. "I knew what it meant to grow up in a house where you weren't wanted, where you were controlled and diminished and told you should be grateful for scraps of affection. Judge Whitmore terrified me. The way he looked at Eleanor, at his children, at everyone, like they were possessions he owned. I couldn't imagine a baby growing up under that gaze, learning to accept that kind of treatment as normal." She stood, moved to the window overlooking the garden. "I followed your story from a distance, Catherine. Saw the foundation announcement, saw what you're doing in your mother's name. This is what she wanted, not just your freedom, but your purpose. She wanted you to use the privilege of the Whitmore name and money without being poisoned by it. To take something that was used for control and transform it into something that sets people free." Sarah joined her at the window. The garden was in full bloom, yellow roses climbing the arbor just as Eleanor had described in her journal. "Will you stay for the launch tonight? Will you help me tell people Eleanor's real story?" Linda turned, surprise evident on her face. "You want people to know the truth? That she orchestrated your kidnapping. I want people to know that love sometimes looks like letting go," Sarah said firmly. "That the bravest thing a mother can do is choose her child's freedom over her own happiness. That secrets kept to protect power are different from secrets kept to protect people." Eleanor's story deserves to be told. All of it. The pain and the courage and the impossible choice she made. Linda's eyes filled with fresh tears. "She would have been so proud of you, of the woman you've become, of the way you've taken the hardest truth imaginable and transformed it into something beautiful." That evening, as 300 of Charleston's most influential citizens gathered in the ballroom, Sarah stood at the podium with Margaret on one side and Robert on the other. Linda Morrison sat in the front row, holding Eleanor's letter like a talisman. Sarah looked out at the assembled crowd, politicians and philanthropists, judges and journalists, all waiting to hear about the Eleanor Whitmore they thought they knew. The perfect Charleston lady, the devoted judge's wife, the tragic mother who'd lost her daughter to a mysterious kidnapping. "My name is Catherine Harrison Whitmore," she began, her voice steady and clear. "But most of you know me as Sarah Mitchell from Brooklyn. I'm Eleanor Whitmore's daughter, the baby who disappeared 32 years ago, and I'm here tonight to tell you the truth about what happened, about the impossible choice my mother made, and about why that choice inspired this foundation." The room went completely silent. Sarah took a deep breath and continued, telling Eleanor's story. All of it. The abuse, the control, the desperate plan, the decades of grief. She held nothing back, letting the truth shine light into all the dark corners that Charleston society preferred to ignore. "My mother saved me," Sarah concluded, her voice breaking but not faltering. "She saved me by giving me up, and now I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure other families don't have to make that choice. That children can be safe in their own homes. That truth and love can coexist. That freedom doesn't have to cost everything." The applause started slowly, then built like a wave, until the entire room was standing. And Sarah knew with absolute certainty that Eleanor was finally at peace. Eleanor Whitmore made the most impossible choice a mother can make. She chose her daughter's freedom over her own happiness, her child's future over her own heart. For 32 years, she lived with a grief so profound it shaped every moment of her existence. Yet never once did she regret the decision that tore her world apart. What would you do if loving someone meant letting them go forever? Could you carry that weight of silence, that burden of secret sacrifice, knowing you might never see them again? Eleanor did, and in doing so, she proved that the truest form of love isn't holding on. It's having the courage to release what you treasure most. Sarah's story reminds us that our identities are not just given to us by circumstance or blood, but shaped by the love of those brave enough to protect us, even at great cost to themselves. Sometimes the people who save us are the ones who break all the rules, who risk everything, who choose our well-being over law and convention and their own safety. John Mitchell wasn't Sarah's biological father, but he was her father in every way that mattered, through sacrifice, devotion, and unconditional love. And Eleanor, though she never got to raise her daughter, remained a mother through decades of silent watching, faithful hoping, and eventually, from beyond the grave, setting her daughter free one final time by giving her the truth. If you found yourself moved by this story of sacrifice, courage, and the complicated beauty of love, please follow our channel for more stories that touch the deepest parts of the human experience. Like this video if Eleanor's choice resonated with you, and share it with someone who needs to hear that love sometimes looks nothing like we expect it to. Comment below and tell us, could you make the choice Eleanor made? We'd love to hear your thoughts.